1865, Nevada. The chilling secret of the Caldwell sisters' cruel human scientific research. In the summer of 1865, a journalist named Thomas Reed ventured deep into the harsh landscape of Nevada. Following the trail of a haunting suicide note, he arrived in Silver Valley, a mining town that appeared prosperous but carried within it a silent sickness, a decay of the soul that only the discerning could perceive. What he would uncover would rewrite a dark chapter in Nevada's history, a secret buried deeper than the most precious veins of silver. Detailed ledgers documented the systematic poisoning of over 150 men, women, and children, all orchestrated by the three Caldwell sisters, whose names would be deliberately expunged by federal authorities. The Caldwell family had turned an entire community into their personal laboratory, conducting experiments on arsenic poisoning that produced valuable toxicological data, offering insights that the science of the era craved. However, their methods were so horrific that their story was not rejected, but concealed. The federal government decided their data was too valuable to be destroyed and their crimes too heinous to be brought to light. The three sisters did not vanish without a trace. Their fate was far more complex. They were erased from history, leaving behind their meticulous records and a nagging question that still echoes in the halls of power today. What is the price of knowledge when it is paid for with human lives? Before we delve into the story of the Caldwell sisters and their human laboratory, I want you to know that this tale is drawn from recently declassified documents from the National Archives. If you are captivated by dark historical mysteries like this one, be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss these hidden truths. And please let me know in the comments what state or city you're listening from. I love connecting with fellow mystery enthusiasts from around the world. What the journalist Thomas Reed and later federal investigators would find would challenge all notions of the line between scientific progress and inhuman cruelty. In 1865, Nevada was at the height of the Comstock Lode silver rush. The land was a magnet for dreamers, reckless investors, and brilliant but corrupted minds willing to do anything to create their legacy. It was into this world of hope and desperation that the three Caldwell sisters arrived from the east coast of America, bringing with them not only iron-willed ambition, but also an elite education rarely seen on the Nevada frontier. They were not typical prospectors. They were the architects of a unique and dangerous vision. Eleanor, the eldest at 35, was a brilliant chemist who had graduated from a prestigious university in Boston. Beatrice, the middle sister, possessed a sharp business and administrative mind, capable of turning a desert into an organized community. And Clara, the youngest, was an educator with progressive theories on child development. They chose an isolated valley, surrounded by barren mountains, where initial surveys indicated abundant silver deposits. They named it Silver Valley. The location was perfect, close enough to major trade routes to transport ore, but also far enough for their operations to escape close scrutiny. More importantly, this isolation gave them complete control over the environment and the people within it. Within months, Silver Valley had attracted over 150 workers and their families. The Caldwell sisters offered irresistible conditions, wages significantly higher than other mines, sturdy log cabins instead of makeshift tents, and most notably, a school run by Clara herself, promising a quality education for their children. This promise of a stable, safe, and progressive community was a powerful magnet for families tired of the nomadic and risky life of the West. They did not know they were stepping into a perfectly designed cage where every meal, every cup of water, and every lesson was part of a horrific experiment. The town that grew under Beatrice's direction reflected the orderly, systematic thinking of the Caldwell sisters. Unlike the chaotic, temporary mining camps commonly seen, Silver Valley was meticulously planned. The log cabins were arranged in neat rows, complete with a central square and a sturdy schoolhouse. The Caldwell sisters' main compound sat on a small hill overlooking the entire valley, an impressive complex of buildings that included their private residence, Eleanor's modern laboratory, and Beatrice's office, where all records of production, costs, and personnel were carefully stored. However, what made Silver Valley special was not just its order, but its promise of a healthier living environment. The Caldwell sisters claimed to have developed advanced ore processing methods that minimized toxic dust and water pollution, chronic problems in the mining industry. Workers did indeed notice the air was fresher here, and the drinking water from the communal wells seemed much cleaner than elsewhere. What they didn't know was that this cleanliness was a controlled illusion. Eleanor had designed a complex system to introduce a colorless, odorless, tasteless amount of arsenic into the town's water and general food supply. The concentration was scientifically calculated to cause slow, chronic poisoning rather than acute, allowing them to observe the long-term effects on the human body and mind. Clara, in her role as educator and community caregiver, established a small infirmary to monitor everyone's health. She kept astonishingly detailed records on each resident, noting every headache, every stomachache, every change in personality. To the residents, Clara was a guardian angel, always caring, listening, and providing free medicinal tonics. The reality was far more cruel. Clara was conducting the most comprehensive field study on human arsenic toxicity, using her own neighbors as test subjects. The three sisters had designed life in Silver Valley not to maximize happiness, but to maximize data. Different family groups were supplied with water from wells with varying arsenic concentrations. Their diets were subtly adjusted. Every aspect of life was controlled according to a master plan that only the three sisters understood. By the winter of 1864, the first cracks in Silver Valley's perfect facade began to appear. The residents, once healthy and optimistic, had become weary and pale. They complained of persistent stomach pains, hair loss, and skin sores. More alarmingly, these symptoms didn't seem to follow the usual patterns of illness. Some people were only affected physically, while others became irritable, paranoid, or fell into a state of apathy and indifference. But the clearest sign that a nightmare was unfolding came not from the miners, but from the children of Silver Valley. On an afternoon in November 1864, Mary O'Connell was calling her 7-year-old daughter, Sarah, in for dinner. She found the girl in the yard, sitting motionless on a swing, her eyes staring blankly into space. She was muttering a nonsensical string of numbers, over and over without stopping. When Mary shook her shoulder, the girl, startled as if waking up, smiled and asked what was for dinner, as if nothing had happened. Mary was not alone. Across Silver Valley, parents began to notice their children exhibiting similar behaviors. Some children would obsessively arrange their toys into complex patterns for hours on end. Others lost their ability to concentrate, their memories clearly failing. They were still lovely children, still playing and laughing, but then, as if flipped by an invisible switch, they would sink back into their own haunting private worlds. Clara Caldwell, the dedicated educator, was sought out by everyone. She went to the O'Connell home with a gentle and compassionate expression, the kind that had won the trust of the entire community. She examined Sarah carefully, asking her simple questions, testing her memory and cognitive abilities. After a period of observation, she concluded that the girl might be suffering from academic stress, a syndrome caused by the new educational environment and the pressure to learn. "Nothing to worry about, Mary," Clara said reassuringly, her voice carrying the warmth of an educated Easterner. "This is a natural reaction of a young mind facing too much new information. I have a special herbal tea. It will help Sarah's mind relax and return to normal in a few days." She handed Mary a carefully wrapped paper package of tea. She didn't mention that inside that tea was a precisely calculated dose of arsenic, meant to accelerate the process of cognitive decline to gather data for the next phase of the experiment. But Clara Caldwell had never seen this before. She had created it. The children of Silver Valley were displaying the first symptoms of an elaborately orchestrated experiment in chronic arsenic poisoning, a plan that had been in place since the town's first day. The sisters had hypothesized that arsenic affects the developing nervous systems of children differently and more profoundly, and they were systematically testing this by introducing controlled doses of arsenic into the town's water and sugar supplies, which were provided abundantly and freely as part of community life. The herbal tea Clara prepared for Sarah O'Connell was not a cure, but a precisely measured dose of an arsenic compound designed to accelerate cognitive decline. In her research laboratory, Clara recorded detailed observations of the girl's condition, noting the exact timing of behavioral changes, the specific nature of the repetitive obsessions, and the child's increasingly slow responses to intellectual tests. This information was scientifically catalogued by Beatrice alongside similar data from dozens of other children in the community. What made the Caldwell's records particularly valuable and particularly horrifying was their comprehensiveness. Unlike medical reports of the time, which often relied on cases of acute poisoning, the Caldwell sisters' experiment provided a complete, longitudinal picture of arsenic's effects on humans, from initial exposure to the final, debilitating stages. They had created a living laboratory that allowed them to observe and document every phase of chronic poisoning with scientific precision. As the winter weeks passed, the children's symptoms worsened and spread. Parents who had initially thought their children were just being difficult or tired now grew extremely worried as their children began to lose weight, their skin turned sallow, and their intellects clearly deteriorated. Some children became completely silent, communicating only through empty stares. Others became extremely irritable and sensitive, screaming at bright lights or loud noises, finding peace only in darkness. The adult population of Silver Valley was also facing its own health crisis, though the initial symptoms could be mistaken for the hardships of mining work. The strongest men began to suffer from severe stomach cramps and chronic diarrhea. Many complained of numbness in their hands and feet, making their work difficult and dangerous. Others experienced memory problems, difficulty concentrating, and sudden outbursts of anger and paranoia, shattering the harmony of their families. What the workers never suspected was that their symptoms were not the price of seeking silver, but the predetermined outcome of a cruel experiment taking place right under their feet. The Caldwell sisters had subtly divided the community into research groups. Each neighborhood was supplied with water from a separate well, and Eleanor had adjusted the arsenic concentration in each well with chemical precision. Beatrice's management expertise allowed them to monitor the diet and health of each family, while Clara's educational knowledge allowed them to assess cognitive decline in both children and adults through cleverly disguised tests. The goal was not to cause immediate death. That would be a waste of data. Their goal was to comprehensively study the process of chronic arsenic poisoning. They wanted to observe every stage of the disease, from the first subtle signs to the complete physical and mental collapse. Death was merely the final data point in a long and painful process. As 1865 began, the true scope of the experiment began to reveal itself in ways that not even the three sisters had fully anticipated. The arsenic poisoning, which had initially manifested as physical symptoms, now began to corrode the social fabric of Silver Valley. Once harmonious families were now fractured. The personality changes caused by arsenic had turned loving husbands into paranoid abusers and gentle mothers into women indifferent to their own children. John Miller, a strong blacksmith and one of the first to arrive in Silver Valley, was a tragic example of the disease's devastation. A cheerful, kind man, famous for his laughter that echoed through his forge, Miller began to experience deep depressions alternating with intense paranoia. He became convinced his neighbors were plotting to steal his tools. During one such paranoid episode, he barricaded his house and workshop, locking his wife and children inside for 2 days, only to break down in tears and beg for forgiveness when the paranoia subsided, leaving confusion and fear in its wake. Beatrice Caldwell recorded these behavioral changes with the precision of an accountant taking inventory. Her records, written in cold scientific terms, described Miller's condition as Subject 23, male, 38 years old, exposure group B, medium arsenic concentration, duration 21 months. Exhibits pronounced psychiatric disorder, alternating paranoia and depression. However, motor skills and physical strength are maintained. Recommend maintaining dosage to observe long-term progression of psychiatric symptoms. The Caldwell sisters had developed their own classification system for arsenic poisoning, dividing the disease into clearly defined levels of decline, which allowed them to predict and record its progression. Level 1 included initial symptoms, chronic fatigue, digestive issues, and minor mood changes. Level 2 involved more pronounced physical symptoms, including skin lesions, hair loss, and numbness in the extremities. Level 3 was severe cognitive decline, often accompanied by paranoia, depression, and marked physical deterioration. Most chilling of all was Level 4, which the Caldwell sisters reserved for subjects they deemed ready for final observation. These individuals were moved to a few isolated cabins at the end of the valley, where other residents were forbidden to go. Ostensibly, it was a convalescent area for them to receive special care, but in reality, it was a death laboratory, where they could study the final stages of arsenic poisoning without interruption. By early 1865, nearly half the adult population of Silver Valley had progressed to level 2 or higher. The town, once filled with laughter and hope, had become a place of suspicious glances, closed doors, and an invisible fear that permeated the air. Neighbors who were once close now avoided each other, unsure if the friend they had just shared a meal with might suddenly become paranoid and violent. The children, the first victims of the behavioral changes, were also progressing through their own carefully documented stages of poisoning. Many no longer attended Clara's school. Those who did could not focus, spending hours staring out the window or drawing bizarre, repetitive shapes. Clara, in her role as teacher, had to struggle to maintain the appearance of a normal classroom, while she herself was destroying their minds. Clara, despite being one of the masterminds, was not entirely immune to the psychological impact of her actions. She was an educated woman, one who best understood child development. To maintain control and her calm demeanor, she prescribed herself mild sedatives, which she documented in a private journal. She began to notice changes in herself, persistent nightmares, a growing indifference to the cries of the children, and a coldness seeping into her soul. She rationalized it as the price of science, a necessary sacrifice for a greater goal, never admitting that she too was becoming a victim of the very monster she had created. What made the Caldwell's experiment particularly insidious was their understanding of human psychology in a closed environment. They had built their study on the complete isolation of Silver Valley, ensuring that the residents had no external frame of reference. When everyone around you is tired, sick, and behaving erratically, those states gradually become the new normal, a grim reality that no one questions. The three sisters reinforced this isolation by controlling information absolutely. All mail in and out of the valley had to pass through Beatrice's office, allowing them to screen and eliminate any suspicious messages. Strangers were deterred with stories of smallpox outbreaks or dangerous roads. The few who managed to arrive were warmly welcomed by the sisters themselves, given a tour of the safe areas, and never allowed private contact with the residents. Beatrice maintained detailed records not only of biological markers, but also of the psychosocial aspects of the experiment. Her ledger, written in a private shorthand, described the erosion of trust in the community, the rise in domestic violence, and the effectiveness of the rumors they spread to maintain order in a community that was rotting from within. Just when it seemed the situation in Silver Valley couldn't get worse, the three sisters launched what they called the in-depth research phase. This phase began in early 1865 when a large wagon arrived in town, ostensibly to deliver new books and equipment for Clara's school. In reality, it contained advanced medical and psychological instruments that Eleanor had secretly ordered from Europe. The Caldwell sisters announced to the community that they had invited a team of educational and medical experts from the East Coast to implement a comprehensive health and intelligence program to help those who were struggling. Clara introduced the two new experts, a man and a woman with a learned and trustworthy appearance, but they were not doctors or educators. They were carefully selected associates, individuals who shared the Caldwell's cold scientific views and were hired to assist with the next phase of the experiment. This team of experts transformed the school into a human development center. Residents were required to attend periodic health and counseling sessions based on their level of decline in Beatrice's classification system, with those at level 3 receiving special care. What the residents didn't know was that these counseling sessions were designed not to cure them, but to study their reactions to various stimuli in a completely controlled environment. The center contained equipment that was astounding for its time. Chairs designed to restrain movement, tools to precisely measure nerve reflexes, and devices that allowed them to administer different compounds to the subjects to observe their interaction with arsenic. The Caldwell sisters spared no expense in building their human laboratory, funded by enormous profits from the silver mine and by secret grants they began receiving from a group of scientists in Paris who were desperate for experimental toxicological data. This European connection was perhaps the most cunning aspect of the entire plan. Through relationships Eleanor had established during her studies, the Caldwell sisters had contacted a prestigious research group in Paris specializing in toxicology and environmental diseases. These scientists, bound by European medical ethics, could never conduct the kind of long-term, controlled human study that the Caldwells were running in Silver Valley. Eleanor served as the primary liaison, translating Beatrice's and Clara's notes into formal scientific language, organizing the data according to the specific research questions posed by the group in Paris. This research group was told that the data came from a field study in a remote American mining community, where residents voluntarily participated in exchange for stable housing and employment. The European scientists, hungry for unique data to support their theories, asked no questions about methodology or ethics. They published groundbreaking papers based on the data from Silver Valley, building their reputations on the suffering of anonymous victims and deliberately avoiding a deeper look into its origins. Meanwhile, at the Human Development Center in Silver Valley, horrifying results were being produced. Subjects who were called in for counseling often left in a worse state, though the decline was subtle enough to be confused with the natural progression of the strange illness. The Caldwell sisters and their associates were using these sessions to test various catalysts, determining which compounds, when combined with arsenic, would accelerate neurological decay and which might temporarily alleviate symptoms to prolong the observation period. One of their most terrifying discoveries was that certain types of heavy metal salts, when administered in small doses along with arsenic, could cause very specific neurological damage. They found that they could selectively destroy a person's emotional control while leaving their intellect intact, or impair short-term memory without affecting long-term memories. These findings, meticulously documented and sent to Paris, would eventually lay the groundwork for later understandings of how toxins attack the brain, but at a price that no civilized society could accept. The children of Silver Valley were the primary subjects of this in-depth research phase. Clara Caldwell had established a special enrichment program for children who were struggling academically. On the surface, it was a humanitarian effort to help them keep up with their peers. In reality, the program was a series of cruel psychological tests, experimental treatments, and exposure to various chemical compounds to determine their effects on the developing nervous system. Little Sarah O'Connell, whose muttering of nonsensical numbers was one of the first signs of the tragedy, had progressed through several levels of decline under Clara's meticulous observation. By early 1865, she showed severe cognitive impairment. She no longer spoke in complete sentences and had developed a slight tremor in her hands, making it impossible for her to hold a pen. Instead of helping, Clara was using Sarah to test theories about whether certain sedatives could temporarily improve motor function in arsenic poisoning victims. Her mother, Mary O'Connell, was also being ravaged by arsenic. Although her symptoms were different from her daughter's, she suffered from frequent, intense headaches and short-term memory loss, making it impossible for her to fully grasp the extent of Sarah's decline. Every time she tearfully expressed her concerns about her daughter's condition to Clara would reassure her that the girl was making good progress in the special program and that her silence was just a phase of internal reflection. This psychological manipulation of families was fundamental to the Caldwell sisters' strategy. By controlling information and exploiting the cognitive decline caused by arsenic in the parents themselves, they were able to maintain their experiment even as the subjects became increasingly debilitated. Those who might have spoken out were themselves sinking into a fog of fatigue, pain, and confusion, robbing them of the will to challenge the authority of the women they once trusted. As the harsh Nevada winter set in, Silver Valley became even more isolated. The trails were covered in snow, completely cutting off contact with the outside world. The Caldwell sisters took advantage of this natural isolation to implement the most brutal phase of their experiment. They began what they called final stage observation, conducted at the isolated convalescent area. This facility, which residents were told was a place for the most seriously ill to find peace, was in fact a death house. Here, the Caldwell sisters and their associates could study their subjects in the final weeks or months of their lives. The building was designed with one-way observation windows, allowing for continuous monitoring without disturbing the subjects. It also had a small laboratory where Eleanor could conduct immediate autopsies to analyze the devastation of arsenic on the internal organs. But even as they prepared to harvest their final, most valuable data, the Caldwell sisters began to sense that their veil of secrecy might soon be lifted. The attention of Nevada authorities on remote mining camps was increasing, and there were whispers about the unusually high rates of death and illness in certain areas. The Caldwell sisters began to prepare countermeasures, both to protect their research and to protect themselves from any outside interference. The first sign that the outside world had taken notice of Silver Valley came in the spring of 1865, when a mining bureau inspector, Mr. Arthur Vance, intended to visit the community to check the books and labor safety conditions. Mr. Vance never reached Silver Valley. Weeks later, his horse was found wandering in a nearby town. Mr. Vance himself had vanished without a trace. Beatrice Caldwell recorded nothing about Mr. Vance in the official ledgers. But in Eleanor's coded journal, there is an entry detailing an unexpected external subject, a healthy man who had accidentally drunk water from a stream that had been deliberately contaminated with an extremely high concentration of arsenic. The Caldwell sisters had apparently intercepted the inspector before he reached the town, turning his death into an opportunity to collect valuable data on the effects of acute arsenic poisoning on a previously unexposed body. The disappearance of Arthur Vance prompted a San Francisco newspaper to send the journalist Thomas Reed to investigate. But the Caldwell sisters were prepared for this. Beatrice had spent months creating a second set of records depicting Silver Valley as a modest mining operation with a stable workforce. Eleanor had prepared clean samples of ore and water to present to any inspector. Most importantly, Clara had coached the residents on how to answer questions. This coaching process exposed the full extent of arsenic's devastation on the community's minds. Many could no longer clearly remember their lives before arriving. Others confused real memories with the official stories Clara had told them during their counseling sessions. The Caldwell sisters had essentially created a community of unreliable witnesses who could not provide coherent testimony even if they wanted to. By the summer of 1865, after Thomas Reed had left and filed his report, the Caldwell sisters knew their time was running out. They had nearly achieved their goal, to conduct the most comprehensive study of arsenic toxicity in humans. Now, they faced the final challenge: to conceal all evidence while still preserving their research findings. Beatrice began to implement what she called the Conclusion Protocol, a systematic plan to erase all traces of Silver Valley's existence while ensuring their scientific data would survive. The plan consisted of several phases, each designed to eliminate a specific type of evidence and create a perfect cover story for anyone who came later. Phase 1 of the Conclusion Protocol involved moving all subjects at levels 3 and 4 to the isolated convalescent area. Ostensibly, this was a humanitarian act, concentrating the sickest people for easier care. In reality, the Caldwell sisters were corralling the most dangerous witnesses into a single location where they could conduct final observations before beginning the systematic process of elimination. Phase 2 was the destruction of all physical evidence. They dismantled the specialized equipment in the Human Development Center, burned the notebooks containing the most gruesome experimental details, and began the process of cleaning the environment. Eleanor's chemical expertise proved vital in this phase. She used other chemical compounds to neutralize the residual arsenic in the soil and water in ways that the science of the time could not detect. Phase 3 was the most terrifying aspect of the protocol. The Caldwell sisters were determined that their experiment must not be judged by the outside world. They believed that if their methods were revealed, the scientific community would never accept the precious data they had gathered. They began to systematically eliminate the most seriously ill subjects, using methods that made the deaths look like natural complications of the strange illness, but were in fact carefully calculated overdoses of arsenic. This process was primarily carried out by Eleanor and Clara. Eleanor's chemical knowledge allowed her to determine the precise dosage to cause a rapid death while still leaving signs of internal damage consistent with chronic arsenic poisoning. Each death was meticulously documented, with autopsies performed immediately to collect tissue samples and complete the final dataset. Just when we thought we had seen the full extent of the cruelty in Silver Valley, the final phase of the Caldwell sisters' plan escalates beyond imagination. If this story is sending a chill down your spine, share it with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit the like button to support us, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss these hidden truths. Let's find out together what happens next in this tale of scientific obsession turned to crime. By the end of summer 1865, the population of Silver Valley had dwindled from over 150 to fewer than 40. Beatrice explained to the remaining few that many families had decided to leave to seek their fortunes elsewhere or return home after making enough money. In reality, most of these missing residents were dead and buried in unmarked graves, cleverly disguised on the hillsides surrounding the valley. The surviving residents were primarily individuals whom the Caldwell sisters called the resistance group, people whose particular physiology made them more resistant to arsenic, making them valuable subjects for long-term study. These individuals were monitored more closely than ever. All their activities were watched, and they were completely isolated from any information from the outside world. However, a rift began to appear among the sisters. Clara, the youngest, who had once been an idealistic educator, began to be tormented by her conscience. Witnessing the children she once cherished decline physically and mentally day after day had eroded her scientific resolve. As the conclusion protocol began and the deaths became frequent, Clara begged her sisters to stop, destroy all the data, and flee. But Eleanor, the eldest and the brain behind the experiment, flatly refused. She argued that they were on the threshold of a great discovery, an achievement that would change toxicology forever. The data they had collected, she insisted, would save thousands of lives in the future from industrial poisoning. To give up now would render all the past sacrifices meaningless and betray their own noble scientific purpose. But even as Eleanor reinforced her resolve, the pressure from outside had become impossible to ignore. Journalist Thomas Reed's report had caused a small stir among federal officials. The government, worried about a scandal that could affect the booming silver mining industry, dispatched a special investigative team led by a seasoned federal agent named Elias Thorne to investigate unusual activities at Silver Valley. On a morning in October 1865, Agent Thorne and his team entered Silver Valley with a warrant for a full search. What they witnessed would haunt them for the rest of their lives and lead to one of the largest cover-ups in the history of America's secret medical research. The town that greeted Thorne looked like a ghost of its former self. Most houses were empty, their windows broken, their gardens overgrown. The few residents they met on the street looked like walking corpses, trembling, with sallow skin and vacant eyes, answering questions in a disjointed, incomprehensible manner. At the main compound, the three Caldwell sisters received the investigative team with a terrifying calm. Beatrice, as the manager, presented perfectly prepared ledgers showing a modest but profitable mining operation. Eleanor was ready to explain her safe chemical methods, while Clara, with sad eyes, spoke of a strange illness caused by malnutrition that had claimed many lives, despite her best medical efforts. But Agent Elias Thorne was not easily fooled. Years of investigating complex cases had taught him to recognize the difference between a natural tragedy and a concealed crime. The pathetic condition of the survivors, the absence of the majority of the population, and the unnervingly calm demeanor of the three sisters all indicated that Silver Valley was hiding a secret more terrible than a few deaths from disease. The breakthrough came when Thorne's team searched the Human Development Center. Although the Caldwell sisters had tried to clean up, they couldn't erase every trace. Hidden behind a false wall in Clara's office, the investigators found strange medical instruments, complex psychological measurement devices, and, most terrifyingly, a ledger that Beatrice had not managed to completely burn. The pages that survived the fire revealed the full scope of the experiment. Page after page contained cold-blooded notes on the systematic poisoning of hundreds of human beings, the careful adjustment of arsenic concentrations, and the scientific monitoring of their decline on an unprecedented scale. The investigators were horrified to realize they were holding evidence of one of the most cruel human experiments ever conducted. Eleanor tried to explain it away as an anthropological study conducted with the community's consent to understand the effects of a harsh living environment. She claimed they were conducting legitimate studies on frontier diseases to help other communities. Beatrice supported this explanation, presenting the letters exchanged with the scientific group in Paris as proof that their work was recognized by the international scientific community. But the investigators had found too much evidence to believe these lies. At the isolated convalescent area, they found the bodies of those who had recently died, some still in their beds with monitoring devices attached. On the surrounding hillsides, they began to unearth the unmarked graves, containing the remains of dozens who had been eliminated during the conclusion protocol. But the most horrifying discovery was of the living subjects in the final stages of arsenic poisoning, kept alive not for treatment but for continued observation. These individuals, including children who were mere shadows of their former selves, had been completely destroyed mentally. Their bodies clung to a fragile life, just long enough to provide the Caldwell sisters with the final data on arsenic's devastation of the human body. The investigators also found undeniable proof of the Caldwell sisters' connection to the group of scientists in Paris. Detailed correspondence files revealed that data from the Silver Valley experiment had been shared and analyzed in France, where it was used to support toxicological theories and publish research. The international implications of the case were staggering. A prestigious European research group had unwittingly built its reputation on data obtained through a systematic, brutal human experiment. When confronted with this overwhelming evidence, the three sisters' reactions revealed the distinct personality differences shaped by their roles in the experiment. Eleanor, as the scientific mastermind, remained defiant, arguing that their research would ultimately save countless lives by advancing the understanding of arsenic's toxicity. Beatrice focused on the practical aspects of the work, insisting that their management and record-keeping methods were scientifically perfect and that any flaws were an acceptable price for progress. She stressed the international significance of their findings, claiming that the scientists in Paris would vindicate their work once all the data was analyzed. Clara's reaction was perhaps the most disturbing. The woman who had been the community's educator showed no remorse for the suffering she had helped cause. Instead, she expressed deep frustration that the investigation had interrupted her work before she could complete her studies on the effects of chronic poisoning on child psychology. She argued that the surviving children represented irreplaceable research opportunities that would be wasted if the experiment was terminated. The federal investigators faced an unprecedented dilemma. The evidence they had uncovered documented crimes of such magnitude that prosecuting them would require a trial that could last for years and draw unwanted international attention to American mining practices. Even more troubling was the realization that the Caldwell sisters' research, however it was obtained, represented genuine advances in toxicological knowledge that could benefit future generations if properly evaluated and applied, especially in the fields of military medicine and industrial safety. The decision of what to do with the Caldwell sisters and their research was not made by Agent Thorne, but by high-ranking officials in Washington who understood the broader implications of the case. A few weeks later, a federal task force arrived in Silver Valley with orders to conduct a full assessment of the situation and recommend a course of action that would serve the national interest while preventing similar atrocities in the future. This assessment team included top military medical experts, legal advisors from the War Department, and intelligence officers whose primary concern was securing the research data from foreign powers. After 2 weeks of on-site investigation, during which they interviewed the few survivors, analyzed the evidence, and held secret consultations with various government agencies, the task force reached a conclusion that would shape the official response to the Silver Valley tragedy. They determined that the Caldwell sisters' research was too valuable to be destroyed, but also too brutal to be made public through a conventional trial. The systematic nature of the experiment had produced data on chronic arsenic poisoning that was decades ahead of contemporary knowledge. This information could be crucial for protecting American soldiers from future chemical attacks and protecting workers in growing industries. At the same time, revealing the methods by which this data was obtained would create an international scandal, severely damaging America's reputation and providing European powers with powerful propaganda. The solution they proposed became known internally as the Valley Protocol, a plan to preserve the Caldwell's research while ensuring their crimes would be buried forever. This protocol consisted of several components, each designed to extract maximum benefit from the tragedy, while minimizing damage to the national interest. First, the survivors of the experiment were relocated to an isolated military medical facility in Oregon. Here, they received the best medical care, but were also kept under close surveillance. These survivors, including the children whose minds had been destroyed, were given new identities and cover stories, explaining that their condition was the result of an accidental chemical leak at the mine. None of them were ever allowed to contact the outside world or tell their real story. Second, the three Caldwell sisters were given a single choice: face the gallows for mass murder or dedicate their entire body of knowledge to a secret military research program. All three accepted the offer to cooperate. They were transferred to a heavily guarded research facility in California, where their expertise in human experimentation and toxicology was applied to studies on chemical warfare and countermeasures. Their work in the following decades contributed significantly to advances in military medicine and industrial safety, though none of their contributions were ever credited under their real names or linked in any way to Silver Valley. Third, and most importantly, the entirety of the Caldwell's research data was carefully preserved and classified at the highest level of government secrecy. The detailed records of arsenic's effects on the human body became a core part of the National Database on Chemical Agents, a priceless repository of knowledge for future conflicts. Scientists working on government contracts later were sometimes granted access to sanitized portions of the data, never knowing its horrific origin. The town of Silver Valley was systematically erased. The buildings were leveled, the unmarked graves were exhumed and relocated to an undisclosed location, and all physical evidence of the community's existence was eliminated. The mine shafts were collapsed with explosives, and the entire valley was declared a restricted area, officially designated as uninhabitable due to severe environmental contamination. Maps were redrawn to remove any trace of the town, and related records were either destroyed or altered. Perhaps the most sinister legacy was that the federal government used the Silver Valley case as a blueprint for future secret research programs. The techniques the Caldwell sisters had perfected for maintaining absolute control over unwilling subjects, for manipulating the psychology of an entire community, and for concealing evidence of human experimentation became part of the operational manual for clandestine government research projects. The Valley Protocol was refined and applied to numerous other cases in the following decades. Whenever government agencies needed to conduct research that went beyond legal and ethical boundaries, the group of scientists in Paris who had unwittingly published research based on data from Silver Valley faced a difficult decision. When American intelligence agencies quietly informed them of the work's true origin, most chose to discreetly retract their publications and destroy all related records rather than face a scandal that could ruin their careers and reputations. A few who tried to dig deeper were quickly deterred by diplomatic pressure and thinly veiled warnings about the consequences of publicizing classified American research activities. The survivors of the Silver Valley experiment spent the rest of their lives in federal custody. Although their lives were much more comfortable than before, with dedicated medical care and adequate living conditions, they were effectively prisoners. They were encouraged to interact with other survivors, but were never allowed to leave the Oregon facility, never permitted to contact the outside world, and never given the chance to tell their horrifying story. Mary O'Connell, the woman who had lost her young daughter Sarah to the Caldwell's developmental studies, lived until 1915 at the Oregon facility. Her arsenic poisoning had caused permanent neurological damage, leaving her unable to coherently recount what had happened. But the government doctors who treated her documented the long-term effects of her arsenic exposure with the same cold, scientific precision that had characterized the original experiment. Her medical records became part of the classified database built from the Caldwell's research. Little Sarah O'Connell herself survived only until 1870. The child who once muttered nonsensical numbers had lost all cognitive function, becoming an empty shell. Government researchers continued to study her condition until the day she died, using her case to better understand the devastating impact of arsenic poisoning on the developing brain. Her death was recorded in classified files as Subject SV-18, Observation Complete. The three Caldwell sisters, who had accepted government work, continued their research for nearly 2 decades, applying their expertise to top-secret defense projects until the early 20th century. Eleanor died in 1905, taking with her profound secrets about chemical experimentation on humans, techniques she had refined to perfection. Beatrice survived until 1918, long enough for her knowledge of management and psychological control to contribute to propaganda efforts in World War I. Clara, the longest-lived, passed away in the 1,920 seconds. Her later work, ironically, focused on developing occupational safety and industrial health programs benefiting American workers, with no one knowing her expertise came from a horrific source. The classified files related to the Silver Valley experiment were sealed in military archives, where they lay untouched for decades. In the 1,970 seconds, when Senate investigations began exposing unethical research programs like MKUltra, some officials considered declassifying the Caldwell files. However, the scale and systematic cruelty of the experiment were deemed too sensitive, too shocking for public release, and the files remained sealed. It wasn't until the late 1,990 seconds, during a routine archival review, that a small portion of the Silver Valley documents were finally declassified. Even then, most identifying information was blacked out. The Caldwell sisters' names were removed, and the location of the experiment was hidden under code names and altered geographic coordinates. The historians and scientists who reviewed these files were shocked by the advanced methodology of the experiment and the comprehensiveness of the dataset, but they were also utterly horrified by the human cost of obtaining that information. Today, the land where Silver Valley once stood remains under federal ownership, officially designated as part of the Nevada test site. Civilians and visitors are forbidden from entering the area. There is no plaque, no monument, nor any sign that a community once lived and died there. There is no evidence of the mine shafts, and not a single trace of the human laboratory that once operated in the isolated Nevada landscape. The arsenic contamination, according to official documents, has been dealt with, but the federal government maintains strict control to prevent any independent investigation that might unearth the buried truth. The advances in toxicology and industrial safety, built in part on the research of the Caldwell sisters, have saved many lives over the last century. Modern understanding of the long-term effects of arsenic poisoning, stricter safety protocols in mining, and methods for early detection of chemical exposure all carry a dark part of Silver Valley's legacy. But the ethical price of this knowledge continues to haunt those who know the truth. At universities, medical and history students sometimes read references to a mysterious American field study from the 1,860 seconds that provided groundbreaking data on arsenic toxicity. Their professors can only explain that this research was conducted under the harsh conditions of the Wild West, where ethical standards were lax, never knowing they are describing one of the most brutal and systematic human experiments ever conducted. The Caldwell's data continues to influence science, but its origin remains buried under layers of classified files and deliberate obfuscation. Perhaps the most disturbing legacy of the Silver Valley experiment is its influence on subsequent secret government research programs. The techniques that Eleanor, Beatrice, and Clara developed for maintaining control over unwilling subjects, for manipulating the psychology of an entire community, and for erasing the evidence of human experimentation became part of the foundational knowledge of American intelligence and military research organizations. The Valley Protocol was adopted and refined in dozens of other classified research programs throughout the 20th century, each built upon the foundation laid by three sisters in an isolated Nevada mining valley. The full truth about Silver Valley may never be revealed. The classification system that protects the Caldwell's records also ensures their story remains fragmented, told only through heavily redacted documents and tightly controlled disclosures. The survivors, who could have provided first-hand testimony, died decades ago in federal custody. Their experiences are known only to the government doctors who treated them and the researchers who continued to analyze their cases as anonymous datasets. What remains is a mystery that challenges our understanding of scientific ethics, government accountability, and the price of knowledge. The Caldwell sisters achieved their goal: to conduct one of the most comprehensive studies of human toxicology ever undertaken, but they did so using methods that violated every principle of human dignity and rights. Their research advanced human knowledge, but at the same time, it demonstrated the depths of cruelty that can be justified in the name of scientific progress. The three sisters, who disappeared into government service after the destruction of Silver Valley, took with them secrets that continue to influence American medical and military research to this day. Their legacy is not written in textbooks or acknowledged contributions to science, but in classified files that document both their achievements and their crimes. They succeeded in creating scientific knowledge that has benefited humanity, but at a cost that no ethical society should ever be willing to pay. This mystery shows us that the line between scientific progress and human exploitation is thinner than we might think, and that institutional secrecy can preserve both valuable knowledge and horrific crimes for generations. The Caldwell sisters understood that scientific progress sometimes requires crossing ethical boundaries, but they also proved that some boundaries, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. What do you think of this story? Do you believe the whole truth about Silver Valley has been revealed, or do you think there are still secrets hidden in those classified files? Leave your comments below and share your theories about what really happened in Silver Valley. If you enjoyed this tale and want more horror stories like this, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who loves dark historical mysteries. The truth about American history is often stranger and more disturbing than we could ever imagine, and there are countless other stories waiting to be uncovered. See you in the next video.